She was already on the bench when I came back from my round. Gate 14. The one that doesn't connect to any active route. I hadn't been gone more than 6 minutes. The gate had been empty. The overhead lights at gate 14 had been off for 2 years. The digital board above it read "No service" in dim amber letters that nobody ever looked at. But there she was. Sitting. Hands in her lap. A small brown suitcase at her feet. And the board above her read "Departing." I need to go back. The Greyhound terminal on Lassiter Avenue in Bakersfield isn't a place most people think about unless they're passing through it. It's not a destination. It's a pause between destinations, a long, fluorescent-lit breath between wherever you were and wherever you're going. Most of the passengers who come through between 11 at night and 5 in the morning look like they've already been traveling for a long time. They have that specific kind of tiredness that goes past the eyes and into the posture. They buy coffee from the machine near gate 3 that always runs too hot. They sit in the molded plastic chairs and watch the departure board change, and when their gate lights up, they stand and shuffle forward with their bags, and that's the last I see of them. I've worked the night shift here for a little over 3 years. My name's Marco. Before this I drove a delivery truck for a restaurant supply company out of Fresno, but I messed up my shoulder in a loading dock accident and the doctor told me I'd need 4 to 6 months of recovery before I could handle that kind of lifting again. That was 3 years ago. The shoulder healed fine. I just never went back. There's something about night work that suits certain people, and I think I'm one of them. It's not that I dislike people. I just found out I function better when the ratio of people to silence tips in silence's favor. The terminal between midnight and dawn is a specific kind of quiet. Not empty, there are always passengers, always a few staff, but muted. Sounds carry differently. The squeak of a mop on tile. The hum of the vending machines. The occasional diesel rumble from the bays. My role isn't complicated. I'm listed as overnight terminal attendant, which in practice means I handle whatever comes up between 11 p.m. and 5:30 a.m. Gate coordination with dispatch. Cleaning issues. The occasional passenger who needs help reading the board or finding the right bay. Light maintenance. I walk the terminal every 45 minutes on a loop, gates 1 through 12 on the east wing, gates 13 through 20 on the west wing, then the lobby, the restrooms, and back to the dispatch office behind the ticketing counter. The terminal is U-shaped. East wing and west wing curve out from the central lobby like two arms reaching toward the bus bays. The east wing is the active side, that's where all the departures and arrivals happen. 12 gates, usually 5 or 6 running routes on any given night. The west wing used to be active too, back when the terminal handled more regional routes, but those got cut during a round of budget restructuring before I started. Gates 13 through 18 are closed. No service. Lights dim to a statutory minimum. Gate 19 is used for storage, they keep stacked chairs and old signage in there. Gate 20 is a maintenance access point. And then there's Gate 14. I should explain what Dina told me during my first week. Dina Reyes was the senior overnight attendant when I started. She'd been on the night shift for 11 years and she had that specific kind of authority that comes not from rank but from simply having been present for so long that the building itself seems to defer to her. She trained me. She was patient but firm, and she had a way of saying things once, clearly, and expecting them to stick. Most of what she taught me was practical. How to reset the gate displays when they glitched. Which mop heads actually fit the industrial bucket and which ones the day staff kept ordering wrong. How to file the nightly incident report so that Darnell, the terminal manager, wouldn't send it back with red pen marks. Where the breaker panel was. How to talk to passengers who were angry or confused or both without escalating anything. On my fourth night, she walked me through the West Wing for the first time. It was quiet over there in a different way than the rest of the terminal. Not just less busy, less present. The air felt thicker. The dimmed lights gave everything a brownish, underwater quality. Our footsteps echoed more than they should have, or maybe I was just paying more attention to them. The closed gates had metal barriers across their entries and small printed signs that read "Gate closed, no service." We walked past 13, 15, 16, 17, 18. Then she stopped in front of 14. Gate 14 didn't have a metal barrier. It had a bench, a single bench, the same molded plastic as the rest of the terminal but somehow older looking, more worn. The gate entry behind it was open. Not locked. Not barricaded. Just open, leading to an empty bus bay with no bus in it. The digital board above it read "No service," same as the others, but unlike the others, it was powered on. That dim amber glow. Dina didn't look at the gate. She looked at me. "You're going to see people sitting here sometimes," she said. I waited. Not every night. Maybe once a week. Maybe less. They'll be sitting on that bench. They'll have luggage. They'll look like regular passengers. I asked her what she meant by "look like." "I mean they'll look like passengers. But they're not on any manifest. They didn't come through ticketing. There's no route assigned to this gate and there hasn't been one in years." She paused. "You do not talk to them. You do not approach the bench. You note the time in your log, you continue your round, and when you come back on your next loop, they'll be gone." I almost laughed. It sounded like the kind of hazing story senior staff tells the new guy to see if he'll bite. But Dina wasn't smiling. Dina rarely smiled, but this was a different kind of not smiling. This was the face of someone communicating something important with the full understanding that it would sound absurd. "What if they talk to me?" I asked. "They won't." "But what if they do?" "They don't talk, Marco. In 11 years, I have never once heard one of them speak." She turned and walked back toward the East Wing, and the training moved on to how to handle late arrivals, and we never discussed it again. She retired 4 months later. Moved to Tucson to be closer to her daughter. I took over as the sole night attendant. For the first few months on my own, I didn't see anyone at Gate 14. I did my rounds. I walked the West Wing with a flashlight I didn't technically need because the statutory lights were on, but which made me feel better in a way I didn't examine too closely. Gate 14 was always empty. The bench sat there, the "No service" sign glowed its amber, and I passed by and continued to Gate 19 and 20 and circled back. Then, on a Tuesday in November, I remember it was November because the heating system had just been switched on and the West Wing always took longest to warm up, I came around the corner past Gate 13 and someone was sitting on the bench. It was a man. Middle-aged, maybe late 50s. Gray jacket, dark pants, work boots. A duffel bag on the floor beside him. He sat with his hands on his knees, looking straight ahead at the empty bus bay beyond the gate entry. Not reading. Not on a phone. Just sitting. My first thought was that he was a confused passenger. It happens. People come in tired, misread the gate numbers, sit down in the wrong wing and wait until someone redirects them. I started to walk toward him, and then Dina's instructions surfaced with a clarity that surprised me. Like they'd been sitting in my brain fully formed, just waiting. You do not talk to them. You do not approach the bench. I stopped. I was maybe 30 feet from the bench. The man didn't react to my footsteps stopping. He didn't look at me. He just sat there, facing forward, perfectly still. I noted the time. 1:47 a.m. I finished my round. It took about 20 minutes because I had to check a restroom issue in the East Wing. Someone had left a faucet running. When I came back through the West Wing on my next loop, the bench was empty. The duffel bag was gone. There was no sign anyone had been sitting there. I wrote it in my log, 1:47 a.m., individual observed at gate 14. No interaction. Cleared by next round. Darnell never commented on it. The log went in with everything else. I don't know if he even read that entry. Over the next several months, it happened 5 more times. Always on my overnight shift. Always a single person. Always sitting on the bench with luggage, facing the empty bay, motionless. The second time was a woman in a green coat with a rolling suitcase. The third was a young man, maybe early 20s, with a backpack and a paper bag from a fast food place I didn't recognize the logo of. The fourth was an elderly woman holding a purse with both hands on her lap. The fifth was a man in a suit, not a business suit, more like a church suit, dark and slightly too big for him. The sixth was the woman with the brown suitcase. The one I mentioned at the beginning. She was there on a night in March, and she was the first one who was different. She was different because the departure board said departing. In all 5 previous instances, the board above gate 14 had read NO service. The same as it always did. But that night, at 2:22 a.m., the board clearly read departing. No route number. No destination. No time. Just the single word in green LED letters, the same shade of green used on the active gates in the East Wing. I stood there longer than I should have. Maybe a full minute. I was looking at the board, not at her, but I could see her in my peripheral vision. Same posture as all the others. Sitting. Facing forward. Hands in lap. Motionless. I continued my round. I logged it, 2:22 a.m., individual observed at gate 14. Board displaying departing. No route info. No interaction. The next morning, before my shift ended, I checked the gate display system. The board at gate 14 was back to NO service. I pulled up the diagnostic log for the display. Every gate board keeps a local record of what it's shown and when. The log for gate 14 showed nothing. According to the system, the board had displayed NO service continuously for the past 26 months without interruption. That bothered me. Not in a scared way. In an administrative way. If the display had malfunctioned, it should show in the log. That's what diagnostic logs are for. I filed a maintenance note about a possible display error at gate 14, and I left it at that. The maintenance note came back 3 days later with a response from Irwin, the day shift facilities tech. He'd gone over and checked the board. His note read, display functioning normally. No error in log. Board shows no service. No action required. Fine. 3 weeks passed. 2 more sightings at gate 14, both normal, if I can use that word. NO service on the board. A solitary figure on the bench. Gone by the next round. I logged them. Nobody commented. Then, on a Wednesday in April, I saw the board change in real time. I was doing my West Wing loop. I came around the corner past gate 13. Gate 14 was ahead of me, and the bench was empty. The board read no service. I was walking at my usual pace, not hurrying, and I was looking directly at the board when the letters flickered. Just once. A fast, clean flicker. And then it read departing. And the bench was no longer empty. A man was sitting there. Heavy-set, wearing a flannel shirt and jeans. Large suitcase on the floor next to him. I hadn't looked away. I need to be clear about that. I was walking a straight corridor with the bench in direct line of sight. The bench was empty, and then, in the same moment the board flickered, it was occupied. Not like someone had walked up and sat down in the fraction of a second my eyes adjusted. Like a cut in a film. Frame 1, empty bench. Frame 2, man on bench. My legs kept walking. I didn't stop this time. I passed the gate at a distance of about 20 feet and continued down the corridor. I didn't look back. I logged the time, 1:09 a.m., and I continued my round. But that night, I did something different. On my next loop, 45 minutes later, instead of just checking whether the bench was empty, I approached the East Wing dispatch terminal and pulled up the exterior camera feed for bus bay 14. Each bus bay has a camera. Even the closed ones. The feeds run continuously and store 72 hours of footage before overriding. I'd never had a reason to check Bay 14's camera before. The feed showed the empty bay. Concrete pad, painted lane markings faded almost to nothing, chain link fence at the far end separating the terminal property from the access road. Overhead lights off. No bus. No movement. I rewound to 1:09 a.m. At 1:09 a.m., the camera showed a bus in Bay 14. It was idling. I could see the exhaust, a thin, pale stream rising from the back of the vehicle into the cold air. The bus was white. Not Greyhound livery. No logos. No route number displayed. Just a white bus, idling at a gate that hadn't been active in years, that I had walked past 20 minutes ago and seen only an empty bay through the gate entry. I sat in the dispatch chair and watched the feed. At 1:16 a.m., a figure walked into frame from the direction of the gate entry. Heavy-set man. Flannel shirt. Large suitcase. He walked to the bus. The door was already open. He boarded. The door closed. At 1:18 a.m., the bus pulled forward out of the bay and turned onto the access road. Its headlights were off. It drove into the dark and the camera lost it within seconds. I checked the bench. I got up and walked to the West Wing and looked. Empty. The board read no service. I went back to dispatch and rewound the camera feed again to make sure I'd actually seen what I thought I'd seen. I watched it 3 times. Then I checked the camera log, the metadata that records when the feed is active and when the bay registers motion. The log showed no motion events for Bay 14. According to the system, nothing had moved in that bay in over 8 months. But I had the footage. I was looking at it. A bus, a man, a departure. I saved the footage to a USB drive I kept in my bag. I don't know why I did this. Instinct, maybe. Something about the disconnect between what the camera showed and what the log recorded made me want a copy of the truth before the 72-hour overwrite erased it. I went home that morning with the USB drive in my jacket pocket and I didn't sleep well. Over the next 2 months, I changed how I did my job. Not outwardly. I still did my rounds. Still maintained the lobby, still helped the real passengers on the East Wing, still filed my reports. But I started structuring my nights around Gate 14. I checked the Bay 14 camera feed at the start of every shift. I started carrying a small notebook, separate from the official log, where I recorded every Gate 14 sighting with details that the official log's one-line format didn't accommodate. Here's what I documented between April and June. April 14th, 1:09 a.m. Heavy-set man, flannel shirt. Board red departing. Camera showed bus in bay. Departed 1:18 a.m. Log registered no motion. April 29th, 3:33 a.m. Elderly woman, 2 bags. Board red departing. Camera showed bus. Departed 3:41 a.m. No motion in log. May 7th, 12:52 a.m. Young woman, backpack, denim jacket. Board red NO service. Camera showed empty bay. Bench empty by next round. No bus. May 20th, 2:15 a.m. Men in work coveralls, steel lunchbox style case. Board red departing. Camera showed bus. Departed 2:28 a.m. No motion in log. May 20th, 2:15 a.m. That one needs more detail. Because that was the night I first noticed the pattern. I was reviewing the footage from the April sightings on my home laptop. I'd gotten into the habit of transferring the USB files to my computer and studying them, looking for details I might have missed. I was watching the April 29th footage, the elderly woman, and I paused on a frame where she was walking toward the bus. The bus door was open and there was light coming from inside. Not bright, but enough to see a few rows of seats through the windshield. And in those seats, I could see shapes. People. Passengers already aboard. I went back to the April 14th footage. Same thing. Faint interior light. Shapes in the seats. People already on the bus before the Gate 14 passenger boarded. Where had they gotten on? I checked the other terminal cameras, the ones covering the access road, the main entrance to the bus bays, the perimeter. On both nights, there was no footage of a bus arriving at Bay 14. The bus was simply there when the board changed to departing, as if it had materialized in the bay the same way the passengers materialized on the bench. But the people already inside, they had to have come from somewhere. Other stops. Other terminals. Other Gate 14s. I didn't like that thought. I put it away and went to bed. May 30th, 1:40 a.m. This was the sighting that changed everything, and it didn't happen at Gate 14. I was in the East Wing doing a routine check of the active gates. Gate 4 had a 2:15 a.m. departure to Sacramento, a regular route, 2 or 3 passengers most nights. I was walking past the gate seating area when I saw a man sitting alone in the second row of chairs. Normal. Passengers often arrive early for late-night departures. But something about the way he was sitting made me pause. Hands on knees. Facing forward. Motionless. The posture. It was exactly the posture. I've seen hundreds of people sit in this terminal. They slouch, they lean, they cross their legs, they look at their phones, they sleep with their heads tilted back or slumped forward. Nobody sits the way the Gate 14 passengers sit, that rigid, centered stillness, like a photograph of a person rather than a person. But here was someone sitting exactly that way at gate 4. An active gate. With a real departure. I approached him. I said, "Evening. You waiting on the 2:15 to Sacramento?" He didn't respond. He didn't look at me. "Sir." Nothing. Not ignoring me. Not asleep. Just absent. The way a chair is absent. Present as an object but containing no response. I was standing about 5 feet away. Close enough to see details. He was wearing a dark blue windbreaker and khaki pants. Clean shoes. He had a small carry-on bag between his feet. His face was, and I want to be careful with how I describe this, his face was completely normal. Middle-aged, clean-shaven, brown hair. But looking at it felt like looking at a composite. Like if you averaged 1,000 faces together and got something that was technically a face but belonged to no one. I backed up a step. Then another. At 2:15 a.m., the Sacramento bus pulled into Bay 4 on schedule. I watched from the dispatch window. 3 passengers boarded. The man in the windbreaker was one of them. He stood when the gate was called, picked up his bag, and walked to the bus with the others. He moved normally. He boarded normally. The bus departed at 2:19 a.m. I pulled up the manifest for the Sacramento route. 3 passengers ticketed: Dolores Fuentes, Alan Park, Michael Sims. I looked at the ticketing records. All 3 had purchased tickets through the website. All 3 had valid confirmation numbers. Which one was he? Were any of them real? I called the Sacramento terminal the next morning, just before my shift ended. I told the clerk I was confirming arrival for a passenger on the overnight from Bakersfield. She checked. The bus had arrived on schedule. She counted the passengers off: a woman, an older man, and a younger woman. 3 passengers. But not the same 3. No one in a blue windbreaker. I asked. Middle-aged guy, carry-on bag. No, sir. Just the 3 I mentioned. I hung up and sat in the dispatch chair for a long time. The men had boarded a real bus on a real route. The bus had arrived at its real destination. But the man was not on it when it got there. Somewhere between Bakersfield and Sacramento, a 4.5-hour drive through the Central Valley on the 99, he had stopped being on the bus. Or the bus had stopped being the bus. Or there had been a moment, somewhere on that dark highway, when the bus that was the Sacramento route became, briefly, the same white bus with no logos that I'd seen on the Bay 14 camera. I started watching the active gates differently after that. Not every night. Maybe twice a week. I'd identify a passenger with the posture, the stillness, the forward-facing blankness, the luggage placed just so, and I'd track them. I'd note the gate, the route, the departure time. Then the next morning, I'd call the destination terminal and ask about arrivals. June 3rd. Gate 7, 12:30 a.m. departure to Phoenix. A woman in a gray sweater, sitting with that stillness. 4 passengers ticketed. Phoenix terminal confirmed 3 arrivals. June 11th. Gate 2, 1:45 a.m. departure to Las Vegas. A teenage boy, maybe 17, with a backpack. Posture. Stillness. 6 passengers ticketed. Las Vegas confirmed 5 arrivals. June 15th. Gate 10, 3 a.m. departure to Los Angeles. A man in mechanic's coveralls, older, with a toolbox-sized case. 3 ticketed. 2 arrived. Every time, 1 person fewer. Every time, the missing one matched the description of the passenger with the posture. They were boarding real buses. And they were disappearing in transit. I want to explain something about how this felt, because I think it's important. I was not terrified. That might seem strange. But terror requires a sense of immediate threat, and none of this felt directed at me. It felt like witnessing a process. Like seeing the machinery behind a wall you'd always assumed was solid. There was dread, yes. A low, persistent hum of it, like a refrigerator in a quiet room, something you stop noticing until the power cuts and the silence makes you realize how loud it's been all along. What I felt most was a pull to understand. Where were they going? Who were they? Were they people at all, or something shaped like people? And if they were boarding real routes and vanishing before arrival, what was happening in that space between departure and destination? What was the bus becoming in those dark highway hours? Late June. I made a decision that I've thought about every day since. I started watching the faces. Not just the posture. The faces. I had 6 USB drives by now, all footage from the Bay 14 camera, and I had my notebook with descriptions of every anomalous passenger I'd spotted at the active gates. And I started comparing. The men from Gate 4 on May 30th, the one in the blue windbreaker who was supposed to be on the Sacramento bus. I had a clear enough image of his face from memory. Composite. Averaged. Belonging to no one. On June 22nd, I was reviewing Bay 14 footage from a sighting in early June. A woman had boarded the white bus. I paused on a frame as she passed through the pool of light near the bay's edge. Her face was turned slightly toward the camera. It was the same face. Not similar. Not reminiscent. The same face. The averaged, composite, nobody's face, on a different body, a different gender, a different apparent age. It was wearing a woman's features the way the windbreaker man had worn a man's features, correctly but generically, like a default setting. I checked the other footage. Every Gate 14 passenger whose face I could make out in the bay camera had the same face. Not the same physical arrangement of features, the bone structure changed, the skin tone changed, the age changed, but the same quality. The same uncanny blankness. The same sense of looking at a placeholder where a person's identity should be. They were all the same thing. Or they were all the same nothing, wearing just enough of a body to board a bus. July 7th. I almost quit. Not because of what I'd seen, but because of what I found in the old records. Darnell keeps the terminal's administrative records in a set of filing cabinets in the back office. Mostly mundane stuff, maintenance logs, staffing rosters, incident reports. But the bottom drawer of the last cabinet had older files, going back 15 years or more. I went looking for the original documentation on when the West Wing gates were closed. I found the closure order. Dated 8 years ago. Standard administrative language: due to reduced route allocation, gates 13 to 18 are hereby designated inactive. Displays to be set to NO service. Physical barriers to be installed at gate entries. All gates. 13 through 18. But gate 14 didn't have a barrier. It had a bench. I kept digging. Behind the closure order, there was a separate document, a single page, no letterhead, no signature, typed on what looked like older stock. It read: Gate 14 is to remain accessible. A bench is to be placed at the gate entry. The departure display is to remain powered. No personnel are to interact with passengers at this gate. This arrangement is to be maintained regardless of operational status changes to the terminal. That was it. No date. No attribution. No explanation. I pulled the staffing rosters. I wanted to know who had been working the night shift when the West Wing closed. I found the roster from 8 years ago. Dina Reyes was already listed as the senior overnight attendant. She'd been here when it happened. She'd presumably seen whatever the transition looked like, when Gate 14 went from being a normal gate to being whatever it was now. And she hadn't just followed instructions. She'd made them her own. She'd built a protocol: don't approach, don't interact, logged the time, and passed it to me as though it were simply how the job worked. As though it were as routine as mopping the lobby. I thought about calling her in Tucson. I still had her number. But something stopped me, and the something was this: I realized I didn't want to know what she knew. I wanted to know what she didn't know. I wanted to know if she'd ever checked the cameras, ever called the destination terminals, ever looked at the faces. Or if she'd spent 11 years seeing the passengers on the bench and deliberately, carefully, chose not to look any further. Because there was wisdom in that. I could feel it. There was an equilibrium she'd maintained for over a decade: see the anomaly, note it, move on, and I had broken it in under a year. I didn't call her. July 19th, 2:08 a.m. This is the part one need to write down carefully. I was doing my East Wing loop. Gate 6 had a 2:30 departure to Reno. 2 passengers were in the seating area. One was a young woman talking softly on her phone, a rolling suitcase beside her. The other was sitting 3 seats away from her. The posture. Male, mid-30s, dark jacket, jeans. Small duffel bag. Facing forward. Hands on knees. The face, I made myself look at it, the face was the composite. The average. The placeholder. But this time, something else. The young woman on the phone shifted in her seat, and her elbow bumped the armrest near the man. She glanced over at him. An automatic, polite glance, the kind you give a stranger when you accidentally encroach on their space. She froze. Not dramatically. Not a gasp or a flinch. Just a small, total stillness that lasted maybe 2 seconds. Then she turned back to her phone and lowered her voice even more, and she stood up and moved to a seat on the other side of the gate area. She didn't look at the men again. But I saw her face as she moved, and she was pale. Not I've seen a ghost pale. More like the blood had simply prioritized being elsewhere. A survival pallor. Her body had decided, in the space of that 2-second glance, that she needed to be further away from what she'd just looked at, and it was rerouting resources accordingly. She'd seen it too. Not the posture. Not the luggage. The face. The wrongness of it. That deep composite nothing quality that registers not in the conscious mind but somewhere lower, somewhere that still remembers what a predator looks like even when the predator looks like nothing. I made a decision. I walked to gate 6 and I stood near the seating area, within the man's peripheral vision, and I said, clearly and directly, "Sir, can I see your ticket?" I had never spoken to one of them before. The men didn't move. "Sir, I need to see your ticket or boarding confirmation." The young woman was watching me from her new seat. Her phone was still at her ear but she wasn't talking. The man turned his head. It was a slow movement. Mechanical but not robotic, more like the movement of something that had learned the physical motion of turning one's head but hadn't internalized why a person would do it. His eyes found me. They were brown. Normal. Correct. But looking into them felt like looking into a hallway where every door is closed and there's no one home, and there never was. He opened his mouth. 2:30, he said. His voice was flat. Not monotone, it had the right cadence, the right pitch for a man of his apparent age and build. But it had no grain. No history in it. No evidence that this voice had ever said anything before or would ever say anything again. It was the vocal equivalent of his face, a default. 2:30 to Reno, he said. I have a ticket. He reached into his jacket and produced a slip of paper. A printed ticket confirmation. I took it. The name on it was David Kessler. Departure, 2:30 a.m., Gate 6, Bakersfield to Reno. Confirmation number and everything. I handed it back. Thank you, I said, because I didn't know what else to say. He took the paper and returned it to his jacket and turned his head forward again, and the interaction was over. He resumed the posture. The stillness. I walked back to dispatch. My hands were not shaking. I want to note that, because I think the absence of shaking was its own kind of wrong. My body should have been reacting. I had just spoken to something that was not a person, had looked into its eyes, had heard its voice. I should have been flooded with adrenaline. But instead I felt drained, as if the interaction had pulled something out of me through a very small hole. The 2:30 bus arrived on schedule. 4 passengers boarded, including David Kessler. I watched from the dispatch window. He walked normally. He boarded normally. The bus departed at 2:34 a.m. I called Reno the next morning. 3 passengers arrived on the overnight from Bakersfield, the clerk told me. Not 4. 3. Do you need the names? Was there a David Kessler? A pause. Keyboard sounds. No David Kessler on the manifest. He boarded with a printed confirmation. Sir, there's no David Kessler in our system at all. No ticket, no confirmation number, no record. I didn't respond. The clerk asked if I was still there. Yeah, I said. Clerical error. Don't worry about it. I hung up and sat in the dispatch chair and thought about the slip of paper I'd held. It had looked real. It had felt real, the weight and texture of standard ticket stock. But if there was no David Kessler in the system, then the ticket was a prop. A costume piece. Part of the disguise, like the face and the voice and the body that sat in the correct posture of a waiting passenger. And then a worse thought, what if the ticket had been real until I asked to see it? What if, by approaching, by speaking, by making it interact, I'd forced it to produce something, to fabricate a detail it wouldn't have otherwise needed? What if the name David Kessler hadn't existed until the moment it reached into its jacket? What if I'd made it more real by paying attention to it? I pulled back after that. I stopped calling the destination terminals. I stopped reviewing the Bay 14 footage. I went back to Dina's protocol, see, note, move on. For 3 weeks, I maintained the equilibrium. It didn't hold. August 10th, 3:15 a.m. I was mopping the lobby. Routine work, meditative almost, the rhythmic push and pull of the mop, the clean chemical smell, the quiet. The lobby was empty except for a woman asleep in one of the chairs near the main entrance, waiting for a 5 a.m. departure. I heard footsteps in the West Wing. Not one set. Multiple. A soft, regular percussion of shoes on tile, coming from the direction of gate 14. I stopped mopping. I stood in the lobby with the mop handle in both hands and I listened. The footsteps were moving toward me. Not fast, not slow. A walking pace. Several people, walking together. They came around the corner from the West Wing corridor. There were 9 of them. 9 figures, walking in a loose group, carrying luggage. Bags, suitcases, backpacks. They walked through the lobby without looking at me. Without looking at anything. They moved with that same quality, correct but uninhabited, and their faces, every one of them, had the composite blankness. They walked to the East Wing. I followed at a distance. I don't know why. Dina's protocol was screaming in the back of my mind, but my legs were moving and I was following. They dispersed. 3 of them sat down at gate 2. 2 at gate 5. 2 at gate 8. 1 at gate 11. 1 at gate 3. 9 figures at 5 different active gates, all with departures scheduled in the next 2 hours. They took their positions on the benches. The posture. The stillness. 9 passengers who weren't passengers, now distributed across the East Wing like seeds planted in a field, waiting to board real buses on real routes to real cities. And for the first time, I thought about the destinations. Sacramento. Phoenix. Las Vegas. Los Angeles. Reno. Denver. Portland. Salt Lake City. All the places the overnight routes connected to. And from those cities, more routes. More terminals. More buses rolling through the dark. I thought about how many terminals might have a gate 14. How many night attendants might have a Dina who told them not to look. How many of them listened, and how many of them did what I did, pulled at the thread until the whole shape of the thing began to come clear. I stood in the East Wing corridor and watched them sit in their perfect stillness, and I understood something. They weren't infiltrating the bus system. They were using it. The way a current uses a wire. The way water uses a pipe. The infrastructure existed and they moved through it because it was there and it went where they needed to go. The buses, the routes, the schedules, it was all just a conduit. Gate 14 was the entry point, the place where whatever they were stepped into the mechanism of transit, and the routes carried them outward into the country, scattering them like spores. And the buses didn't know. The drivers didn't know. The ticketing system didn't know. Only the cameras knew, and only if you looked. Only the destination clerks knew, and only if you called and asked the right questions. The system was built to move people from one place to another, and it did this faithfully and without discrimination, because it couldn't tell the difference. Nobody could tell the difference. Not unless they looked at the face and felt that deep, basement-level recognition of something wrong. 3:47 a.m. I was still standing in the corridor. The sleeping woman in the lobby hadn't woken up. The terminal hummed its nighttime hum. I went back to dispatch. I sat in the chair. I pulled up the Bay 14 camera. A bus was idling in the bay. The white one. No logos. And the departure board on my monitor, the master display that showed all 20 gates, listed gate 14 as departing. But there was no one on the bench. The bench was empty. I could see it on the West Wing camera. Gate 14, empty bench, nobody waiting. Because they were all in the East Wing now. They didn't need gate 14's bus tonight. They had 5 real buses to carry them in 5 different directions. Gate 14's bus was idling in the bay with its door open and no one was coming. I watched it idle for 11 minutes. Then the door closed and it pulled forward out of the bay and turned onto the access road, headlights off, and disappeared. The first time I'd ever seen it leave empty. I looked back at the East Wing cameras. The 9 figures sat at their respective gates, motionless, waiting for buses that would take them wherever they were going and leave them there, in those cities, in those terminals, in those streets, looking like people, sounding like people if you made them talk, carrying fabricated tickets with fabricated names. Becoming passengers. Then becoming arrivals. Then becoming, what? I finished my shift. I drove home. I sat in my driveway with the engine running for 20 minutes. It's October now. I'm still working the night shift. I went back to the protocol. See, note, move on. I stopped following them. I stopped checking cameras. I stopped calling other terminals. I do my rounds and I walk past gate 14, and if someone is on the bench I write the time in my log and I keep walking. But there's one thing that I can't stop noticing, and it's the thing that made me write all of this down. The lobby. The daytime lobby. I come in for my shift at 11 p.m., and the day shift attendant, a guy named Carlos, is finishing up. There are always a few passengers in the lobby, waiting for late departures or just arrived on evening routes. Normal people. Tired people. People on phones, people eating, people sleeping. And sometimes, one of them is sitting with their hands on their knees, facing forward, perfectly still. During the day. In the bright, fully lit, fully staffed lobby. Not at gate 14. Not on the overnight routes. Just sitting there among the normal passengers like they've always been there. Like they arrived on a regular bus from a regular city and they're waiting for a regular connection to somewhere else. And nobody notices. Carlos doesn't notice. The other passengers don't notice. The ticket clerks don't notice. Because why would they? It's a bus terminal. People sit. People wait. People leave. I notice because I know what I'm looking at. I recognize the posture. The stillness. The face that belongs to nobody. Last Tuesday, I counted 7 of them in the lobby during the shift change. 7, in the middle of the day, sitting among 30 or 40 real passengers. Mixed in. Indistinguishable unless you knew. I've started wondering about the ratio. Not just here. Everywhere. Every terminal, every station, every waiting room, every airport gate, every train platform. Every place where people sit and wait to be taken somewhere else. How many of the people sitting quietly with their luggage, facing forward, not looking at their phones, are actually people? I've started watching the bus stops on my drive home in the morning. The people standing at the curb at 6 a.m., waiting for the city bus. I watch them from my car as I pass. Most of them are on their phones or talking to each other or shifting their weight from foot to foot in that impatient, living way. And sometimes one of them is standing very still. Hands at their sides. Facing the road. Waiting. I don't know what they are. I don't know where they're going or why. I don't know if they're dangerous. In 3 years, I've never seen one do anything threatening. They sit. They board. They ride. They arrive or they don't. But they're accumulating. That's the thing I can't stop seeing. There are more of them now than when I started. The Gate 14 sightings used to be weekly. Then twice a week. The 9 in the lobby was the most I'd seen at once. And now 7 during the day, in plain sight, and nobody looking twice. I think about Dina sometimes. 11 years she watched gate 14. 11 years of the protocol. Did she see what I see now? Did she watch the numbers grow? Is that why she retired, not because of her daughter in Tucson, but because the count got high enough that she couldn't maintain the equilibrium anymore? Or did she not look? Did she keep her head down for 11 years and leave before the looking became unavoidable? I think that was the right call. I think not looking was the right thing to do, and I think writing this down is a mistake, the same way talking to the one at gate 6 was a mistake. Every time I pay attention, I see more. Every time I look, there are more to see. As if the act of observation is what makes them visible. As if they're only there for people who have learned to recognize them. I'm going to finish this and I'm going to go to work and I'm going to do my rounds and I'm going to walk past gate 14 and not look. But yesterday morning, when I stopped for gas on my way home from the terminal, the woman behind the register handed me my change and I looked at her face and for just a moment, less than a second, I felt it. That deep basement recognition. That survival pallor. She smiled at me and said, "Have a good day." And the voice was right. The cadence was right. The smile was right. But there was no grain in it. I took my change and I walked to my car and I sat there with the engine running, and I watched the gas station through my windshield, and I started counting the people who came and went, and I couldn't stop counting, and the number that felt wrong kept going up.